you cold? I'll help you.
Why are you being so nice?
Chicago, a whiteout night. Alexander Carter, a billionaire father still grieving his wife, watches his one-legged son stumble. A barefoot boy in a torn coat shields him, whispering courage. Then the boy lifts a silver compass. Alexander knows it, his late wife's. Why does this child have it, and what truth will it point to? Chicago wakes under a hard white sky, wind scraping along the glass like a memory that will not quiet. Alexander Carter stands at his penthouse window, tall and still, the city a gray map of streets and steam below him. He wears a custom navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a red tie he knots by touch. Deep blue eyes, dark brown hair brushed side-swept with elegant gray, a square jaw he learned to unclench after years of grief. The smile people remember from magazine covers does not come easily in the mornings. "Dad?" Ethan's voice carries from the kitchen. "The strap's twisting again." Alexander turns. His son sits at the table, 8 years old, thin shoulders hunched inside a wool sweater. The carbon fiber leg ends in a small shoe that never scuffs. Alexander kneels, the floor cold through his dress pants, and works the buckle with careful fingers. "How's that?" he says. "Tighter," Ethan answers. "Better." Alexander taps the side of the socket, listening to the faint, hollow echo. He designed the microprocessor controller that helps Ethan's knee flex in a more human rhythm, but he still checks everything by hand. The habit is part science, part penance. "You hungry for eggs?" Alexander asks. Ethan shrugs. "I miss Mom's pancakes." The room thins. On the counter sits a framed photograph of Sarah by the lake, wind braiding her hair, a small silver compass at her throat that caught the sun and held it. He bought it for her on a summer afternoon when she'd said, smiling, that love needed a north to find its way home. The compass vanished in the crash 6 winters ago. The police logged every item recovered. It was not there. "We'll make pancakes on Saturday," Alexander says, steadying his voice. "Burn the first batch, like she did. Deal." Ethan nods, and for a moment his face lifts with that particular brand of boyish hope that loosens knots inside Alexander's chest. They ride the private elevator down to the car. Snow blows through the garage ramp in silver sheets. The driver offers a greeting. Alexander waves him off, taking the wheel himself. He needs the quiet. He needs to feel the road beneath the tires, the small corrections, the discipline of motion. At Carter Biotech, the lab hums with low light and warmer air. Engineers cluster around transparent limbs nested in charging cradles, small green diodes blinking a heartbeat's code. Alexander watches a prototype calf flex through a range test. "Good stride symmetry," he says. "Within 2%, a researcher answers. "Weather will skew it." "Chicago always does," Alexander says, and he thinks of recess on an icy playground, of a boy who wants to run where other kids run. His assistant approaches with a tablet. "Board moved the product briefing to next week. They also flagged the charity proposal you pushed into the agenda." "Flagged," Alexander repeats. "They want to keep the focus on profitability." He signs where needed, initials a safety report, and pauses at the edge of his office. On the shelf sits a replica compass he bought once in a small act of defiance. It is not Sarah's, but it is the shape of what he lost. He keeps it for its weight in the hand, the way it reminds him where to point his life when the rest of the world pulls. "Dad," Ethan says that afternoon, appearing at the doorway after school with a flushed face, snow clinging to his hat. "Can we go to the park before it gets dark? I want to try the new setting on the knee." Alexander hesitates. The forecast promised a fierce band of lake-effect snow. He calculates wind speed, ground temperature, and risk. He also knows the difference between sheltering a child and shrinking him. 15 minutes, he says. We stay by the benches. We leave when I say. They drive with the wipers beating a steady metronome. Trees along the boulevard glow with frost. The park is a white field ringed by bare branches and empty swings that squeal when the gusts push through. Ethan steps out, breath puffing. He tests the first drift with the cautious bravery of someone who has learned his limits and still hopes to exceed them. Alexander tracks the gait, the stance, each footfall sinking like a small flag planted in snow. "Feels smoother," Ethan says, smiling. It looks like running might someday be a word he says again. Across the path, a cluster of kids shout and throw snow. Alexander glances their way, ready to redirect, ready to be a wall when needed. The wind sharpens. The light dulls toward steel. He reaches into his coat, touches the replica compass, and breathes once. "Stay close," he tells his son. "We move together." Snow thickened into curtains that blurred the lamps ringing the park. Ethan tried to keep pace, his prosthetic leg hissing softly with each step. Alexander tracked every movement, his muscles tense. Then laughter cut across the wind. A knot of boys, bundled in scarves and heavy coats, pointed at Ethan's stride. "Look, robot legs," one shouted. Another mimicked the limp, dragging a boot through the snow. Ethan's face flushed. He tried to keep walking, shoulders squared, but the jeers grew louder. "Bet you can't even run. Bet you'll fall on your face." Alexander started forward, ready to end it. Before he could, another figure darted in, smaller, thinner, wrapped in a ragged coat too short at the sleeves. His shoes were canvas, split at the seams, but his voice cut clear. "Leave him alone," the boy said. "He walks better than any of you." The bullies laughed. "Or what? You gonna stop us?" The boy stepped closer, chin lifted, fists clenched. His breath smoked in the cold. Ethan's eyes widened. He had never seen anyone stand up for him like that, not even kids from school. One of the bullies shoved. The boy stumbled, then straightened. "At least he tries," he said fiercely. "At least he doesn't hide behind a gang." The boys muttered, restless now that someone had called their bluff. The largest spat into the snow, muttering something ugly, and the group drifted away toward the streetlights. For a long second, only the hiss of snow filled the air. Then Ethan whispered, "Thanks." The stranger grinned, a quick flash of white teeth against pale, wind-chapped skin. "Name's Noah," he said. "Don't let jerks like that tell you who you are." Alexander watched them. His chest tightened at the sight of Ethan smiling, really smiling, beside this ragged boy who had nothing to his name but courage. The snow deepened, drifting up their boots. "You cold?" Ethan asked. Noah shrugged. "Been worse." His fingers were red, his coat too thin. Still, he stooped, scooped snow into his hands, and shaped it into a lopsided ball. "Bet I can throw straighter than you." Ethan laughed for the first time in weeks, taking the challenge. They played until their hands stung and their breath came fast in the brittle air. Alexander stood back, half in shadow, unable to move. Something about Noah's defiance stirred old embers in him. When the boys' laughter rang out, clear and unguarded, Alexander felt a pull he couldn't explain. Then Noah reached into his pocket. "Here," he said, placing something small in Ethan's palm. "For luck." Alexander caught the glint of silver before Ethan even looked down. A compass, simple and delicate, dangling on a thin chain. The sight froze him in place. He knew that compass. He had given it to Sarah, his late wife, on the day she told him their son would be born. 6 years later, the police told him it was never recovered from the wreckage. Yet, here it was, in Noah's hand, gleaming against Ethan's glove. Alexander's throat tightened. His heart pounded, louder than the storm. He stepped forward, unable to stop himself. "Where did you get that?" His voice cut sharper than he intended. Noah looked up, startled. His small fingers closed protectively over the compass. "It was my mom's," he said softly. "Before she died. It's all I have left of her." Alexander staggered inside, as if the snow itself had tilted beneath him. because in Noah's face, the delicate lines, the tilt of his jaw, he saw echoes of Sarah. Not imagined, not faint, real. For the first time in years, Alexander Carter felt his world shift, and he didn't know if he could bear the truth waiting in the storm. Snow swirled around the lamps like ash shaken loose from the sky. Alexander's breath caught as he stared at the compass dangling between Noah's trembling fingers. The silver case was scratched, the chain dull from years of wear, but it was unmistakable. He had clasped it around Sarah's neck himself. The engraving on the back, "Find your way home," glimmered faintly through the frost. Alexander's voice was unsteady. "Where did you say you got that?" Noah blinked up at him, wary but not frightened. "I told you, it was my mom's. She wore it every day until she got sick. She said I should keep it so I wouldn't forget her." The boy's features tightened, as if speaking those words reopened a wound. Alexander felt something tear inside him. His wife had been gone for 6 years. She never spoke of another child. Yet here was this boy, standing in the snow, with her compass and her eyes. Ethan tilted his head. "Dad? What's wrong?" Alexander forced air into his lungs, kneeling slowly to meet Noah's gaze. "What was your mother's name?" Noah's small shoulders hunched beneath his threadbare coat. "Sarah," he whispered. The sound of her name from the boy's lips was like a blow. Alexander's knees nearly gave way. His Sarah, the woman whose laughter once filled their kitchen, the woman he buried after the wreck. He gripped the bench behind him, steadying himself against the storm. Do you have a father?" Alexander asked, voice thick. Noah's eyes flickered, guarded. "No," he said. "Never met him. Mom said he wasn't around. She only had me." The words cut deep, colder than the wind. Alexander's chest constricted. Had Sarah betrayed him? Had she hidden a child? The questions slammed against his ribs, each one heavier than the last. Ethan's hand found Alexander's sleeve. "Dad, are you okay?" Alexander forced a faint smile for his son, but his mind was unraveling. He studied Noah again, the curve of his cheek, the stubborn set of his jaw. Shadows of Sarah were there, undeniable. The compass swung between them, catching the lamplight like a signal. Alexander reached out, then stopped himself. "May I see it?" Noah hesitated, then slowly opened his palm. The chain pooled into Alexander's hand, icy against his skin. He turned it over, his breath stilled when he saw the inscription, worn but clear. "Find your way home." It was hers. Noah's voice broke the silence. "Why do you care so much about it?" Alexander closed his fist around the compass, then returned it gently to the boy. "Because it belonged to someone I loved very much." Snow crunched behind them. The park had emptied. Even the bullies were long gone. Only the 3 of them remained, framed by the quiet weight of falling flakes. Ethan leaned closer to Noah. "You want to come over? We've got hot cocoa at home." Noah's eyes widened, surprise flickering into longing before he shook his head. "Can't. I have to go back. If the orphanage finds out I'm late, they'll be mad." Alexander's stomach twisted. "Orphanage?" "St. Mary's," Noah said simply. He pulled his coat tighter. "Been there since Mom died." Ethan looked at his father with pleading eyes, but Alexander could barely process. His pulse hammered as puzzle pieces formed an impossible picture. His wife, another son, a secret life he never knew. "Wait!" Alexander called, stepping forward. "Let me!" But Noah was already backing away, clutching the compass to his chest. "Thanks for letting me play," he said softly to Ethan. Then, with one last glance at Alexander, he disappeared into the curtain of snow. Alexander stood frozen, his son beside him, the storm pressing close. The compass gleam lingered in his mind, and with it, the haunting certainty that his late wife had left behind truths he was never meant to discover. The walk back to the car was silent. Snow lashed sideways across the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep pace. Ethan sat with his chin tucked into his scarf, eyes drifting toward his father. Alexander kept both hands firm on the wheel, but his mind was nowhere on the road. It was trapped in the silver gleam of that compass, in the way Noah's delicate features mirrored Sarah's as if fate had carved her face twice. Ethan finally broke the silence. "Dad, why were you staring at Noah like that?" Alexander swallowed, searching for words. "Because he reminded me of someone I loved a long time ago." "Mom?" Ethan asked softly. The name struck him like a chord long left unplayed. "Yes. He reminded me of your mom." Ethan turned toward the frosted window. It was nice. Brave, too. "Can we see him again?" Alexander didn't answer. He couldn't. His chest ached with questions too heavy for his son's ears. When they reached the penthouse, he tucked Ethan into bed, kissed his forehead, and lingered longer than usual by the door. Alone in his office, Alexander poured a drink he didn't touch. The compass wouldn't leave his mind. 6 years ago, the crash was supposed to have taken everything. Yet tonight, a boy walked into his life wearing Sarah's face and holding Sarah's compass. He sat at his desk and pulled up a secure file on his tablet. Sarah's autopsy, the police report, the personal effects list. No mention of a compass. No mention of a pregnancy either. His throat tightened. Was Noah born before the accident? Was Sarah unfaithful? Or had someone hidden the truth from him? The city lights glimmered beneath the snow. Alexander tapped his phone. "Martin," he said when the line connected, "I need you." His private investigator's voice came on steady. "What's the job?" "There's a boy," Alexander said. He gave the name Noah, St. Mary's Orphanage, the approximate age. His tone was sharp, controlled. "Pull every file you can, medical, adoption, guardianship. I want to know where he came from, who placed him there, and why his paperwork won't add up." Martin whistled low. "Sounds messy." "Then clean it," Alexander snapped. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "And do it quietly. I want no one at the company hearing about this." When he ended the call, he leaned back, staring at the replica compass he kept on his shelf. He held it in his palm, weighing it against the memory of Noah's. Same design, same engraving, but his was cold, meaningless. The boy's was real. A soft knock pulled him from thought. Ethan stood at the door, hair rumpled from sleep. "Dad?" Alexander rose quickly. "What's wrong?" Ethan rubbed his eyes. "I dreamed Mom was calling me," but her voice sounded far away. Alexander's throat tightened. He knelt, pulling his son into his arms. "Mom's always with you," he whispered. "Always." Ethan's small hand clutched his father's sleeve. "Do you think Noah feels the same way about his mom?" Alexander closed his eyes. "I think he does." Later, when Ethan slept again, Alexander sat in the dark, the city glowing faintly through the storm. His mind replayed Noah's words. "It was my mom's before she died. It's all I have left of her." He whispered into the silence. "What did you do, Sarah?" The question hung heavy, unanswered, as snow buried the city in white. The next morning dawned gray, the city muffled under a heavy quilt of snow. Alexander was already awake, seated at his desk with black coffee cooling untouched beside him. The storm had eased, but inside his chest the winds still howled. He scrolled through his emails without absorbing a single line. His focus was elsewhere. On Noah, on Sarah, on the compass that shouldn't exist but did. The phone rang. It was Martin. "I pulled what I could from St. Mary's," the investigator said. "The boy's file is thin. Too thin. No birth certificate on record. Intake forms are forged, sloppy copies of state documents that don't match official seals. Whoever placed him there didn't want a trail." Alexander's grip on the receiver tightened. "What about his mother?" "Listed as Sarah Collins," Martin said. "Died 4 years ago of pneumonia, according to the orphanage, But hospitals in Chicago don't have a death record under that name. Nothing checks out. Alexander's heart stumbled. Sarah Collins. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. His wife's name was Sarah Carter. Was it chance? Or someone hiding the truth in plain sight? "I want DNA," Alexander said, discreetly. "Find a way." "I'll need a sample," Martin replied. "I'll get one," Alexander said, his voice low, final. When the call ended, Alexander sat in silence, staring out at the skyline. For 6 years he had lived with the certainty that his wife's story was closed. Now, page by page, it was being rewritten by a child who carried her face. By afternoon, he found himself driving back toward St. Mary's. The orphanage was a squat brick building wedged between shuttered shops, its paint flaking, the iron gate half broken. He parked across the street and sat watching children trickle in from school, bundled in second-hand coats, and then he saw him. Noah, trudging along with a satchel too big for his shoulders, compass glinting faintly at his chest. Alexander stepped from the car. Snow crunched beneath his polished shoes as he crossed. "Noah!" he called. The boy froze, wary. Recognition flickered in his eyes, then caution hardened his features. "What are you doing here?" Alexander stopped a few feet away, keeping his voice even. "I wanted to see if you were all right, after last night." "I'm fine," Noah said quickly. He shifted, as if ready to run. Alexander studied him. Every instinct screamed to reach out, to demand answers, but he forced gentleness into his tone. "The compass," he said quietly. Can I look at it again?" Noah clutched it protectively. "Why? It's mine." "I know," Alexander said. "It just means something to me." For a long beat, the boy held his gaze. Finally, with reluctance, he let the compass dangle forward. Alexander knelt, careful not to spook him, and brushed his thumb across the engraving. The metal was warm from Noah's skin. "Did your mother ever tell you where she got it?" Alexander asked softly. Noah shook his head. "Just that it was from someone who loved her. She never said more." The words twisted deep inside Alexander, sharper than any blade. He forced a smile, handed the compass back. "It's special. Keep it safe." Noah nodded, eyes still watchful. "I always do." Before Alexander could say more, a nun appeared at the door of St. Mary's, waving the children inside. Noah glanced back once, then disappeared through the gate. Alexander rose slowly, snow biting at his face. He knew what had to be done. That compass wasn't just memory, it was evidence. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Alexander sat at the kitchen table staring at the replica compass on the counter. His mind raced between betrayal and longing, anger and grief. Had Sarah hidden a child? Had she lied to him before the crash? Or was there another truth buried beneath the snow? 2 days later, Martin called again. His voice was taut. "I've got the results. You sitting down?" Alexander was in his study, the city skyline lost behind frosted glass. "Tell me," Martin exhaled. "The DNA match came back. The boy is biologically related to Sarah Carter." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But not to you." The words detonated in Alexander's chest. His hand gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles blanched. "Not mine?" "No," Martin said gently. "Half match only. Noah's her son. Born after the accident, records suggest. But you're not the father." The line blurred, then cleared again as Alexander fought to breathe. Sarah, his Sarah, the woman he buried, the woman he trusted with every corner of his heart, had carried another child. A child he never knew. Was she unfaithful? The question tore out of him. "I can't say," Martin replied. "The timeline's strange. There are no hospital records, no birth certificate. Someone wanted this boy invisible." Invisible. Alexander closed his eyes. The word felt like a knife. He saw Sarah's smile, her hands on Ethan's tiny shoulders, the way she whispered promises of forever. Had she broken those promises before the crash? Or had someone forced her into silence? He ended the call without goodbye, the receiver heavy in his hand. For hours, he sat in the dim study, memories colliding with anger until he felt hollow. Later that evening, Ethan padded in wearing pajamas, dragging his blanket. "Dad, you didn't come say goodnight." Alexander forced a smile, pulling his son close. "Sorry, buddy. I got stuck working." Ethan nestled into his chest. "You think Noah will come play again? He's the only one who doesn't make me feel different." Alexander's heart clenched. His son, born into privilege, but carrying scars no money could erase, had found a friend in a homeless orphan. And that orphan carried Sarah's blood. When Ethan slept again, Alexander stood at the window, snow drifting under streetlights. Betrayal and compassion warred inside him. He could walk away, pretend Noah was nothing but a reminder of a wound. Or he could step into the storm and face what Sarah left behind. His reflection stared back at him, weary but resolute. He whispered into the night, "Whatever you did, Sarah, I can't abandon him, not when he has nothing." The decision settled heavy but certain. He would not walk away. Even if Noah wasn't his son, he was still Sarah's, and that bound him. The next morning, Alexander placed a call. "Martin," he said, "forget scandal. Forget fallout. I want guardianship papers started. Quietly." There was a long silence on the line. "You're sure?" Martin asked. "I'm sure," Alexander replied. His gaze lingered on the replica compass on his shelf. "If Sarah left him in this world, I won't let him face it alone." Snow still clung stubbornly to the city, piled high in the gutters, grayed with soot. Alexander sat in his office at Carter Biotech, files spread before him but unread. Numbers, contracts, proposals, all blurred into meaningless lines. His thoughts refused to leave Noah. The DNA report lay open on his desk. Each word was a blade. Biologically Sarah's, not yours. He had read it 10 times, hoping for a different conclusion. None came. The office door cracked open. Ethan poked his head inside, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad, can we talk?" Alexander softened. Of course. Ethan stepped in, his steps uneven but determined. He slid into the chair across from his father. "I've been thinking about Noah. He doesn't have anyone, Dad. Nobody. He's the only kid who didn't laugh at me." Ethan's voice quivered. "Please let him stay with us. He's my only friend. He understands me." Alexander inhaled slowly, the plea cutting deeper than any shareholder demand ever had. His son, his flesh, his blood, was asking not for toys or games, but for family. "Ethan," he said carefully, "Noah's life is complicated. He doesn't belong to us." "But he belongs somewhere," Ethan insisted, eyes bright. "And maybe that place is here." The words landed with the weight of truth. Alexander leaned back, pressing a hand to his mouth. His empire had taught him control, strategy, dominance. But this was love stripped bare, a boy begging for brotherhood. That night, Alexander found himself staring at the replica compass again. The small engraving glinted under his desk lamp. "Find your way home." He whispered bitterly, "Home to what, Sarah? To lies? To betrayal?" His chest burned. He remembered her laugh, the softness in her eyes, the way she once held Ethan and whispered promises of forever. Had she broken those promises before the crash? Or had fate twisted her path beyond his sight? He paced the length of the room, anger rising. The thought of Sarah with another man clawed at him. He saw images he didn't want, her hand in someone else's, her lips speaking vows that weren't his. Rage pulsed in his veins. But then, just as quickly, another image came. Noah, small shoulders squared against bullies, protecting Ethan without hesitation. A boy who had nothing, yet gave everything he had. Alexander sank into his chair, gripping his hair. Betrayal screamed in one ear, compassion in the other. Which would he choose? A quiet knock broke the storm. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding his blanket. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I was thinking about Noah. I don't want him to be alone." Alexander's anger fractured. He gathered Ethan into his arms, feeling his son's fragile warmth against the cold roar in his chest. "I don't want you to be alone, either," he whispered. Ethan looked up, eyes wide. "Then let's not leave him." Alexander kissed his son's hair, closing his eyes. In that moment, the war inside him found its answer. He might never know the truth of Sarah's choices, but he knew one thing. He could not abandon Noah, not when his own son's happiness was tied to the boy's survival. By dawn, Alexander's decision was sealed. Betrayal could haunt him, but compassion would guide him. The blizzard had eased, but the air outside still bit sharp, like glass pressed to the skin. Alexander drove himself through the quiet streets of Chicago, his thoughts heavier than the snowbanks crowding the curbs. He had meetings stacked from sunrise to evening, but none of them mattered. Only one thing did. Ethan's words echoing in his head. "Don't leave him, Dad. He's my only friend." That night, as Alexander tucked Ethan into bed, the boy grabbed his wrist. "Promise me, Dad," he whispered. "Promise you'll let Noah stay." Alexander looked into his son's eyes, so like Sarah's, filled with trust and hope. His throat tightened. "I promise I'll do everything I can." But promises carried weight. The next day, he walked into St. Mary's Orphanage, snow crunching under his polished shoes. The building loomed tired and gray, its bricks cracked, its windows thin against the cold. Children's laughter echoed faintly from within, yet it sounded hollow, fragile. Inside, the scent of bleach and boiled cabbage lingered. A nun at the desk looked up warily. "May I help you?" Alexander offered a polite smile. "I'm here to speak with Noah." She frowned. "He's resting. It's not visitation hours." "I'll wait," Alexander said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to doors opening. Minutes passed. Then Noah appeared at the hallway's end, compass glinting faintly against his chest. His expression was guarded, like a boy who had learned not to expect kindness twice from the same place. Alexander knelt to meet his gaze. "Noah," he said gently, "would you like to come stay with us for a while, just until things feel warmer?" The boy's eyes flickered to the nun, then back to him. "People don't usually want me around," he said cautiously. "They say I'm too much trouble." "You stood up for my son when no one else would," Alexander said, his voice breaking with sincerity. "That isn't trouble. That's courage." For the first time, a flicker of hope crossed Noah's face. "What if you change your mind?" Before Alexander could answer, Ethan appeared from behind him, grinning wide. "We won't," he said firmly. "You're my brother now." Ethan reached forward, took the compass in his hand and pressed it back into Noah's palm. "Brothers don't leave." Noah froze, staring at Ethan as if no one had ever spoken those words to him before. His lips trembled. "Brothers," he repeated, almost disbelieving. The nun frowned, uncertain. "Mr. Carter, this isn't a simple matter. Guardianship requires—" "I'll handle the paperwork," Alexander interrupted softly, rising to his full height. "But, for tonight, he's coming home." The drive back was quiet, but inside the carnit, warmth bloomed where cold had long ruled. Noah sat beside Ethan, their shoulders pressed together. Ethan whispered jokes, and Noah laughed, the sound fragile but real. Alexander watched them in the mirror, his chest aching. For the first time in years, the word family felt possible again. The penthouse glowed with warm light, but Noah lingered at the threshold as though afraid to step inside. His shoes dripped melted snow onto the marble, and his thin coat hung awkwardly from his small frame. Ethan tugged his hand. "Come on, it's okay. This is home now." Noah hesitated, then stepped across. His eyes darted from the chandelier above to the wide windows framing Chicago's skyline. "This is yours?" he asked softly. Alexander crouched beside him. "Ours, if you'll have it." Noah clutched the compass, his knuckles white. "People don't usually keep me. They say nice things, then they send me back." His voice cracked. "I can't go back again." Alexander's chest tightened. He wanted to promise forever, but the fear in Noah's eyes told him words alone weren't enough. Before he could answer, Ethan grabbed the compass chain and pressed it into Noah's hand. "You're not leaving," Ethan said with surprising firmness. "We're brothers now. Brothers don't leave." Noah blinked rapidly, his small body trembling as though he'd been handed something too heavy for his shoulders. Slowly, he nodded. "Brothers," he whispered, gripping Ethan's hand. The days that followed wove a fragile new rhythm. They sledded down hills in Grant Park, laughter echoing across the snow. They built a lopsided snowman outside the building, scarf crooked, nose too big. Inside, mugs of hot cocoa steamed between their small hands, marshmallows melting into swirls. For the first time, Ethan called Noah brother without hesitation, and one night, long after bedtime, Alexander heard a whisper from down the hall. Noah's voice, tentative but filled with longing. "Good night, Dad." Alexander froze in the doorway, the word cutting deep and healing all at once. He didn't correct him. He simply stepped forward, tucked both boys in, and said quietly, "Good night, sons." But peace never lasts long in Alexander's world. By the end of the week, headlines blared across his tablet at breakfast. "Billionaire CEO brings homeless boy home during blizzard." Reporters circled like vultures, cameras flashing whenever he left the building. At the office, the boardroom buzzed with sharp voices. "Alexander, this is reckless," one shareholder barked. "The company is on the verge of launching a new prosthetic line. Investors are already nervous. Now they think you're distracted." Another chimed in. "Carter Biotech isn't your personal charity. Bringing a homeless boy into your home, what message does that send? We cannot afford sentimentality." Alexander rose slowly. Every inch the man who built an empire with iron and vision. "It sends the message," he said evenly, "that Carter Biotech stands for more than profit. We stand for people." The room quieted, but not with agreement. The whispers of dissent clung like smoke. That night, as snow pressed against the glass, Alexander sat watching his sons asleep on the couch, their heads tipped together. He could still hear the board's warnings echoing in his ears. "You'll ruin everything. You're losing focus." Yet, when Noah stirred in his sleep and mumbled, "Don't leave me," Alexander pulled a blanket over both boys and whispered to himself, "I won't." The storm outside was nothing compared to the one building inside the company. But for the first time in years, Alexander knew which fight mattered more. Winter deepened, yet inside the Carter penthouse, warmth began to feel natural again. The boys turned the once silent living room into a landscape of laughter and clutter, sleds drying by the window, a crooked snowman scarf draped over a chair, chess pieces scattered across the coffee table. For the first time, Ethan called Noah brother without hesitation. The word rolled out easily, like it had been waiting in his chest all along. Noah smiled shyly, though his hand never strayed far from the compass at his neck. One night, the three of them sat by the fireplace. The flames crackled, painting the walls in amber. Ethan leaned against Alexander's side, drowsy after hot cocoa. Noah perched carefully on the opposite end of the couch, as if afraid his weight might tip the balance of belonging. Alexander watched him, the boy's silhouette trembling in the glow. Then, in the quiet, Noah whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Good night, Dad." The word struck Alexander like lightning. He froze, heart seizing, a storm of emotions rising in his chest. Grief, shock, something dangerously close to joy. He turned slowly. Noah's eyes were already downcast, cheeks flushed, as if bracing for rejection. Alexander swallowed hard, then reached across the small gap between them. His hand rested gently on Noah's shoulder. "Good night, son," he said. Noah's breath caught. His fingers clutched the compass tight as though it tethered him to this moment. For the first time, his small frame relaxed into the cushions, and his eyelids fluttered shut with something that looked like peace. Later, after both boys had drifted off to sleep, Alexander carried them to their beds. He stood in the doorway, watching their steady breathing. The image imprinted itself on him. Two boys bound by blood in ways he could not fully untangle, yet tied to him now by something stronger than DNA. But peace outside those walls was fragile. By morning, news trucks camped outside the building. Headlines screamed across every business feed. CEO Carter distracted by orphan scandal. Analysts questioned his judgment. Investors whispered about instability. At the office, the board meeting was ruthless. "Alexander, this cannot continue," one director snapped. "You've taken in a child with no legal ties to you. The press is circling. We're hemorrhaging confidence." Another leaned forward, voice sharp. "You are risking the company's future for sentiment. If you cannot separate business from personal life, we will." Alexander let the accusations wash over him. His hands steepled on the polished table. Once their threats would have rattled him. Once profit and legacy were the only measures that mattered. But now all he saw was Noah's face whispering Dad in the glow of the fire. All he heard was Ethan's plea. "He's my only friend. Don't leave him." When the voices quieted, Alexander rose. His jaw was set, his voice steady. "Carter Biotech was built to heal, not just to profit. If any of you have forgotten that, then you've forgotten why we exist." Silence spread across the room, some faces stunned, others scowling. Alexander gathered his papers calmly. "I will not abandon him, and I will not apologize for remembering what family means." That evening, as the city lights blurred beneath falling snow, Alexander returned home. He found the boys waiting in the window, silhouettes against the frost. Ethan waved wildly. Noah just smiled faintly. Alexander felt the weight of the storm beyond his walls, but in that moment, he also felt something stronger. The anchor of two boys who, against all odds, had given him back his heart. The headlines spread like fire. Every business channel ran the story. Billionaire CEO brings homeless boy home during blizzard. Some anchors praised his compassion, but most questioned his stability. The whispers of scandal rippled through Wall Street. Stock tickers dipped. Carter Biotech's empire trembled. Inside the penthouse, the world felt different. Noah sat cross-legged on the rug, teaching Ethan how to fold paper planes. Their laughter filled the air, but Alexander's phone buzzed relentlessly on the table, vibrating with the fury of investors. At the next board meeting, the tension broke open. "Alexander," one shareholder barked, "the company cannot afford this circus. You're jeopardizing our next prosthetics rollout. Investors are threatening to pull." Another jabbed a finger toward him. "Your personal choices are bleeding into the business. A homeless orphan under your roof? The press smells weakness. If you don't sever ties now, we'll consider a vote of no confidence." Alexander rose slowly, his broad shoulders filling the room. His deep blue eyes scanned each face, calm but unyielding. "You fear scandal," he said evenly. "But what you call scandal, I call purpose. My son needed a friend. A boy needed a home. If Carter Biotech cannot stand on those values, then it deserves to fall." The room erupted. Some protested, some sat stunned. But Alexander left without waiting for their approval. His decision was already made. That night he called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he stepped up to the podium, his navy suit sharp against the floodlights. The boys watched from backstage, Noah clutching Ethan's sleeve like an anchor. Alexander's voice carried steady and clear. Carter Biotech has spent years designing prosthetics to restore dignity to those who've lost limbs. But millions of children still go without. That ends now. Tonight, I'm launching the Compass Foundation, named after the symbol my late wife carried, a reminder to always find our way home. He paused, his gaze softening. This foundation will provide advanced prosthetics to children in need, free of cost, because no child should face a world that mocks their difference. Reporters erupted with questions, but the message had already struck. The headlines shifted by morning. CEO turns scandal into mission. Carter Biotech champions children with limb loss. Back at the penthouse, Noah and Ethan raced to hug him. "You did it, Dad!" Ethan exclaimed. Noah's voice was quieter but certain. "You kept me." Alexander pulled them both close, their small arms tightening around him. The storm outside had not vanished, but inside, the warmth of belonging had never burned brighter. The Compass Foundation launched with a ripple that soon became a wave. News outlets that once questioned Alexander's judgment now hailed him as a visionary. Yet, for Alexander, the accolades meant little compared to the sight of his two boys at the breakfast table. Ethan scribbling in a notebook, Noah carefully sketching designs for a sled he insisted could go faster if they fixed the runner. But not everyone celebrated. At the next board session, the tension was palpable. A director slid a report across the table. "Public sentiment is up," he admitted reluctantly. But investors remain cautious. They fear philanthropy will drain resources. Alexander leaned forward, voice quiet but firm. "Profit without purpose is bankruptcy of the soul. Carter Biotech will stand for something larger than numbers." No one argued further. They knew his resolve was iron. That weekend, Alexander took the boys to the snowy hills near Lincoln Park. Ethan balanced carefully on his sled, prosthetic knee flexing as he braced himself. Noah ran beside him, laughing, urging him forward. The two shot down the slope, their cheers echoing against the frozen air. At the bottom, they collapsed in the snow, faces red with joy. Alexander stood at the top of the hill, heart swelling at the sight. For the first time in years, laughter came easy. That night, as snow tapped gently against the windows, Alexander prepared a surprise. He led the boys into the study, where a photographer waited beside a gilded frame draped in cloth. "What's that?" Ethan asked. Alexander smiled. "Something that belongs to us." He pulled the cloth free, revealing a family portrait taken earlier that week. Alexander in the center, Ethan on one side, Noah on the other, both boys smiling wide, shoulders touching. Beneath the image, an engraving read, "Noah, you belong here." Noah froze, eyes wide, lips trembling. His hand shot to the compass at his chest. "For me," he whispered. Alexander knelt, his voice breaking. "For us, for family." Tears spilled down Noah's cheeks. He stepped forward and buried himself in Alexander's arms, Ethan wrapping around them both. Later that night, Alexander sat alone for a moment, watching the framed portrait catch the firelight. For years he had built empires, raised towers of glass and steel, yet nothing compared to this, to the fragile, beautiful foundation of a family reborn. And as the boys' quiet breathing drifted from their rooms, Alexander whispered into the stillness, "Sarah, I kept them safe, both of them." The snow fell steady outside, but inside, love had anchored them against every storm. The city thawed slowly, but inside the Carter home, warmth had already taken root. Ethan counted down the days until his birthday, excitement bubbling in every word. Noah tried to hide his nerves, still unsure if he truly belonged. The night of the celebration, the penthouse glowed with soft lights. Balloons bobbed near the ceiling. The scent of chocolate cake filled the kitchen, and a handful of close friends and colleagues gathered. Ethan grinned from ear to ear as he blew out candles, his wish whispered into the flicker of flames. "Make a good one," Alexander teased, ruffling his hair. Ethan laughed. I already did. His eyes darted toward Noah. When the gifts were opened, Alexander saved one for last. He brought out a large wrapped frame, setting it gently in front of Noah. This isn't just for Ethan, he said softly. It's for you, too. Confused, Noah peeled back the paper. His breath caught. Inside was a family portrait. Him, Ethan, and Alexander together, smiling as if the storm outside their lives had never existed. Beneath it, engraved words shimmered. Noah, you belong here. The boy's lip quivered. He clutched the compass at his chest, then looked up with eyes wet but shining. No one's ever said that to me before, he whispered. Alexander knelt, his strong hand resting on Noah's shoulder. It's the truth. This is your home. This is your family. Ethan slid an arm around Noah, pulling him close. See? Told you brothers don't leave. Tears spilled freely down Noah's cheeks, but his smile broke wide, unguarded, radiant. For the first time, he didn't look like a boy bracing for loss. He looked like a son embraced by love. The party continued with laughter and games, but for Alexander, that single moment outshone everything. Years of wealth, towers of glass, contracts inked in boardrooms, none of it measured against the fragile treasure of watching Noah's walls finally crumble. Later that evening, after the guests left and the boys slept, Alexander walked into his office. On his desk lay documents he had signed earlier that day. Papers to establish a support group for single parents and grieving families, funded by the Compass Foundation. He traced a finger over Sarah's name on the compass replica, voice low. Your boys are safe, and because of them, so many more will be too. The city outside hummed with quiet, snow melting into dark streets. But within the Carter home, something new had been born. Not just survival, but belonging. Chicago's winter softened into quiet snowfall, the city draped in white that no longer felt suffocating, but serene. Inside the Carter penthouse, the fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. Ethan and Noah sat by the window, foreheads nearly touching, sketching in the worn leather sketchbook Alexander had once filled with Sarah's farm drawings. Now, in clumsy handwriting, the boys drew their own dreams, sleds, inventions, and families with smiling faces. Alexander stood behind them, tall and still, his navy suit jacket draped over a chair, his red tie loosened. He watched them with a gaze that carried both ache and wonder. 6 years ago, grief had hollowed him into a man of steel and glass. Tonight, he felt flesh and blood again, scarred, yes, but whole. The Compass Foundation had grown in days rather than months. Prosthetic fittings were scheduled for children across Illinois, and families who once had no hope now held letters stamped with Carter Biotech's seal. Reporters no longer asked if Alexander had lost control. They asked how they could help, but none of that mattered more than the sight of the boys. Ethan leaned over, pressing his shoulder into Noah's, murmuring, "We're brothers, always." Noah nodded, smiling faintly, fingers tightening around the compass at his neck. Alexander walked over, kneeling between them. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the sketchbook. They handed it over eagerly. On the page was a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands beneath falling snow. Above it, in blocky letters, they had written, Dad, Ethan, Noah. Alexander's breath hitched. He closed the book gently and pulled them both into his arms. "This," he whispered, voice breaking, "is everything I'll ever need." The 3 sat together at the window as night settled in, watching snow drift in slow, silent spirals. The city below pulsed with life, but here was the heartbeat that mattered. A family not bound by perfection, not defined by blood alone, but reborn through love, loss, and the choice to stay. For the first time since Sarah's death, Alexander allowed himself to smile fully. His compass had finally pointed him home. The snow fell steady, a curtain to the past, while inside 3 souls leaned close, scarred but whole, a new family stitched together against the storm.